Today we will have a look at one of the most important and the path-breaking function of an airline, which is the fleet planning. This can make or break, and it can lead to the bottom line to be red or black. Starting with the definition of fleet planning, it's a process to acquire and manage aircraft. Mark these words, all of these words are very important. Fleet planning is a process to acquire and manage aircraft, and for an airline, fleet planning ensures right capacities. For a leasing company, it represents the right portfolios. These capacities of the airlines are required to serve the anticipated markets over many predefined time periods and to maximize the corporate wealth. That is the fleet planning from the airline point of view, deploying the correct capacities on the anticipated markets over a period of time, the purpose being maximizing corporate wealth. For a leasing company, however, fleet planning has a slightly different connotation. For a leasing company, their aim is to rent out short-term capacity to various airlines who are unable to commit funds to buy large aircraft. It allows a flexible approach to fleet composition because an airline can lease and return the aircraft as and when its demand fluctuates. The aim of fleet planning from the point of view of a leasing company is to maximize their profits on the eventual sale of the aircraft. There were many keywords in the previous statements which I made. Let us understand the relevance of each of these. Fleet planning is a process as against an ad hoc decision to simply buy a particular aircraft. When we say acquisition, it could mean purchase or rental from a lease agency or both. Then when we say management, what do you have to manage? You have to change the aircraft assignments, and you have to ensure that when the asset is being sold, it has to be done in a very consistent manner. Capacity. Capacity stands for various things. It stands for number of seats. It stands for how much is the volume of the cargo you are carrying. Capacity also can stand for what frequency you are offering on a particular route. Then remember, fleet planning is not done for today or tomorrow. It is done to keep in mind provision of services to the anticipated demand over short term, medium term and long term. You simply cannot buy and operate aircraft on a daily basis. You have to plan for it. It takes time. Airlines have a very long order book. You place the order today, you may get that after 5 years. Leasing companies can provide you the aircraft in a much shorter time, relatively, but they also will be able to provide if it is available. So you have to look at not just today's requirement, but also the requirements of the forthcoming period. The time periods could be keeping in mind the long-term view, keeping in mind that over a period of time a particular line becomes obsolescent, and also regulations might change. There could be tightening of noise regulations, emission regulations. So what you can use in the short term may not be usable after a particular period of time. So all this has to be kept in mind when we do the fleet planning. And finally, when you say maximizing the wealth, it is not just market share. See, market share in itself need not lead to profits. Just like operating more flights doesn't mean that you are going to make more money. You have to operate the right amount of flights so that you have high load factor, both for passengers and cargo, so that profitability is ensured rather than just market share or market presence. What does fleet planning involve? There are some steps in it. Taking a decision. What decision? Should we modernize the aircraft? or should we buy or lease an aircraft? If we are buying the aircraft, then do we buy an old aircraft, a new aircraft? If it is an old aircraft because they come cheaper, how old? Because you have to keep in mind obsolescence, keep in mind that older aircraft will involve higher operating costs in terms of maintenance. They will also probably consume more fuel because they are old. So, number of aircraft, types of aircraft and age of the aircraft, all these factors have to be considered when we look at fleet planning. Now, there are many factors that affect the fleet planning decisions. Okay. Financial expediency, investment in buying a new aircraft or even leasing a new aircraft is a large amount of money. It requires huge amount of money. There is a risk and that risk has to be managed. Then it is a function of, are aircraft available? Okay. Are they available? Then sometimes the fleet planning is a decision based on national pride, that if you are running a national airline, you need to have in your kitty certain amount of aircraft that can ensure that you are not at the ransom of some agencies or leasing companies. You are not dependent on them to meet your basic requirements. So, certain amount of aircraft, because of national pride, they may be required to be in your kitty. Fleet planning is not a short term issue, it is a long term issue. Of course, there are some short term decisions to be made also, but the primary aim of fleet planning is to estimate the future capacity to accommodate the demand on both the new routes that you are planning to operate and also on the existing routes. We have to look at the changes in the market share and the infrastructure, which also affects the fleet planning decision. So, fleet planning is synonymous with the overall business plan in many cases, because the aircraft configuration that you operate directly affects the brand and that brand can influence the market behavior, right. So, there is a requirement to constantly adjust capacity and frequency, otherwise you might be operating inefficiently. So, to correctly identify the market conditions and then with respect to that assessment, adjusting capacity and frequency is a very important requirement, and there is also a need to constantly monitor the changing regulations. Regulations are becoming tighter and tighter, emission regulations, noise regulations. Okay. So, technical as well as economic, both regulations have to be considered while planning the fleet. As I mentioned, there are some short term activities in fleet planning, but it is primarily in the long term. So, it is a balancing process. Okay. You have to look at the predictability of the market and at the environment, and you have to balance the adaptability of resources, because you have limited resources, they have to be adapted. So, short term aspects of fleet planning involve deciding the aircraft and to deploy them on specific routes and changes in the timetable. So, this will come broadly under scheduling. Medium term is when you amend your route structure and you change the market segment as you slowly evolve in the business, and long term is fleet rollover and changing in the business model that you might like to operate. So, there are three terms in which we do fleet planning, and each of them is important and each of them decides the company's bottom line. Let us look at the fleet planning funnel, which slowly increases with time in its dimension. So, here there is a balancing of two items, adaptability of resources and predictability of market and environment. So, we will notice that as we go from today to 1 year, that is called as a short term fleet planning. Here the adaptability of resources is very limited, because resources cannot be quickly changed. Okay. But you already have a very good idea about the market environment and you can predict fairly accurately what you will require in the next 1 year. So, in the short term you have good predictability of market environment, but very poor adaptability of the resources. As you move ahead to medium term, your predictability of market becomes fair to uncertain, but your flexibility increases. That is the width of this funnel, it increases. And finally, when you go to the long term, you enter the regime of strategic planning. Here you have much larger flexibility, but also it is highly uncertain. That happens over the next 10 to 15 years. But unfortunately, we have to plan for all these three: short term, medium term, long term when we do fleet planning. Let us see how we handle timing conflicts in fleet planning. We have to increase the response to match the resources, because those resources are going to be affected by market changes, and the market changes will also affect our response to the resources. We have to go for higher flexibility in aircraft supply, okay, because there is going to be a reduction in the lead times as a consequence of that. So, there are many agreements types which are signed by the airline with the leasing companies or with the aircraft manufacturers. Okay. There are many, and there are 4 aspects in which we will compare these agreement types: what they represent, what kind of deposit is to be paid, are they legally binding, and what is the purpose. So, the first one is letter of intent. A letter of intent is simply a desire to do business together. You have a product or you have a facility that we are interested, but we are not depositing anything. There is no legal binding, and the purpose of this is to manage your risk. So, you have to be in touch with what is coming in the future. So, for example, today there are newer types of aircraft which are planned in the horizon, such as electrical aircraft, okay, or aircraft that are using hydrogen fuel for its propulsive devices. Now, many airlines are having LOIs with these companies to tell them that, look, in principle we are ready to do business with you, but we are not sure right now, we are not committing. So, therefore, we do not want to have any legally binding contract or give you any deposit, and all we want to do is understand how the market is evolving so that we can manage our risk in the long term. We do not want to be left out. Okay. When you have an MOU with an agency, then you sit down and discuss the terms and conditions of doing business. Maybe there is a small deposit. Okay. MOUs are legally binding, because in MOU you write down how you will be doing the business, and if somebody breaks those conditions, one can take them to court. The purpose of MOU is to have much larger commitment to a particular product or service which is likely to be available in the near future. So, it is little bit more serious. Then we have a firm order. Firm order means, okay, I commit that I am going to order this product from you. There is a deposit necessary, and the deposit could be non-refundable. In some cases, there are airlines who have what is called as options. In options, you do have a deposit, but you have the option not to execute the order later, or you can transfer that order to some other agency or airline who might be requiring that particular product at that point of time. A firm order is legally binding, and the purpose of a firm order is to finalize the deal. Okay. As I said, options, these are to hedge the risk. Okay. Deposit is there, but it is refundable. It is legally binding. But the purpose of an option is that I do not want to commit right now, I do not want to pay upfront a large amount of money and block, I do not want to commit. I want to delay my procurement. If my conditions improve, and if the way I predicted my requirements are going to be there, then I can procure at that particular time. At that time, I do not want to now go to the market and look for options, because it will be too late. So, that is the meaning of options. Let us look at the nature of fleet planning as a multifunctional and a multidisciplinary activity. So, there are 3 or 4 departments here. One department is strategic planning. The head of strategic planning is concerned with definition of the airline product. What are we offering? Are we a low cost airline, or are we an ultra low cost airline, or are we a full service airline? Okay. They are worried about the brand and the market segmentation of their airline. They are concerned about forecasting. So, their crucial and the most important activity is forecasting. What will happen in the future? Then you have another group of people headed by the head of flight operations. Flight operations is interested in schedule. For them, schedule is paramount. Okay. Forecasting is not important for them. For them it is important to plan a schedule based on the forecast given by the strategic planning department. There they are interested in crew resource planning. How do I couple my crew members and my resources together to ensure that I have a scheme by which I can meet the requirements. And here the decisions are regarding the fleet. Okay. Now, flight operations basically, so you can say that the scheduling activity comes primarily under flight operations. Then we have engineering. Now, engineering is only interested in providing the requisite support to the fleet operations. Their job is that when you fly an aircraft or when you operate a particular fleet, you require regular maintenance of the airframe, of the power plant, of the avionics systems. Okay. So, they will give unbiased technical opinion on what is needed to provide service. They are concerned about safety. They are primarily interested to ensure that the aircraft operates safely. And then we have a finance department. Finance department is concerned only about financial viability of the whole business. If the financial viability is not established, then the whole airline has to stop operating. They look at potential tax advantages, schemes, they look at investment versus the net present value, and therefore, all these four departments, they work together in a successful airline. So, that is why fleet planning is useful for all of them in some ways. So, you can see these functions, finance, operation, engineering and planning, they are all coming under the gambit of aircraft evaluation, aircraft acquisition and aircraft management. So, the bottom thing is the operating business and the top one is the bottom thing is the non-operating business, this is the operating business. Okay. So, that is how the work. Now, what are the attributes of a good fleet planning? Three main attributes. A good fleet planning activity is adaptable, flexible and it ensures continuity. Under adaptability, we see that a good fleet plan will assure that the aircraft delivers the right size and appeal, the right performance and the right economics. Under flexibility, we will ensure that the aircraft offers versatility of payload, operational flexibility and we can easily phase in or phase out the aircraft. In continuity, we ensure that we allow the aircraft to be regularly upgraded, so that we can adjust to changing demands, so that we can change the operating scenarios, we can adjust the number of seats, adjust the mix between cargo and payload and we ensure the economy of scales. So, a good fleet plan will look at all these three aspects together. Now, why is performance important in fleet planning? Because performance decides, performance decides whether aircraft can do something or not. Can it carry a payload over a range economically? Can it operate from a particular airport and under particular weather conditions? Okay. Performance is the cornerstone of aircraft evaluation, because when you evaluate the aircraft, you want to check whether it is able to operate from the routes where you want to operate as per the strategic plan of the airline, because that is what gives you access to the markets. There may be a market at some place, but if your aircraft cannot go there because of fuel limitations or ability, if the takeoff and the landing distance required is far more than what is available, you can't access that market, right. Performance hits the economic success of the airline, because if you do not fly efficiently, if you do not consume less amount of fuel, if you do not require less maintenance, you will become an economic nightmare for the airline. Then performance also is helpful, because the future value of the airline assets depend on that, right. This is the key differentiator between competing aircraft, the performance of the aircraft. So, how does the aircraft performance affect the fleet planning? Let us look at it a little bit deeper. So, the important thing is the aircraft weight built up, how the aircraft weight slowly builds up. Then we look at the payload built up, we look at the range payload diagram and we look at the en route performance and we will look at allowances. So, let us see one by one. First, we look at the aircraft weight build up. Now, the minimum weight of the aircraft that comes to us from the manufacturer is called as the manufacturer's empty weight, MEW. This has been supplied by the manufacturer or the leasing agency. Right. Now, on that we have to add certain items which are called as the operating items. These items vary with the airline requirements. For example, low cost carriers do not bother to carry a lot of operating items like food, beverages. Okay. They may carry food, but then because it is chargeable, they have to ensure that they carry only that amount of food which is sold or consumed during the operations. Similarly, the amount of facilities like water bottles, newspapers, magazines which are provided by, or the earphones which are provided by the airline depend on its operating scenario and its type. So, the operating empty weight, it varies from the airline to airline, but it is required to operate the aircraft. So, without the operating items you can't fly the aircraft. So, therefore, operating empty weight or OEW is the minimum weight of the aircraft for operation. Now, above this what do? You only add payload and you add fuel, that is all. So, when you add the maximum possible payload that the airline can carry, you can get what is called as zero fuel weight, which is the operating empty weight plus the maximum payload. Now, on zero fuel weight you are going to add the fuel till you reach the limit of takeoff. Now, there is a number corresponding to the total fuel plus payload which the aircraft can carry. So, you can't exceed that number. Now, you have to do a trade off between fuel and payload. Most airlines would like to travel with no constraints on payload because that is where they make their money, right. So, therefore, generally they would like to carry maximum payload and then they would like to carry enough fuel so that they do not hit the takeoff weight limit, okay, but they are able to have enough fuel for their mission and for the reserve. But sometimes it may so happen that an airline wants to address a particular route which has got a long distance and you may be forced to remove or carry less payload so that you can carry more fuel. But of course, you can't carry fuel more than what the fuel tanks can handle. So, interestingly, there is a trade off which we will see very soon. And here one more thing is to be kept in mind, that takeoff weight of course is the maximum weight that the aircraft can be allowed to carry, but when it comes into land, there is also a limit on the maximum landing weight. So, therefore, you have to ensure that when you plan the profile of the aircraft, you do not encounter a situation where the aircraft weight at landing is more than the maximum landing weight, because that will lead to a problem with the maintenance. Okay. Now, these things, takeoff weight, landing weight and zero, they vary with each route and they are subject to some maximum structural limits. So, as I mentioned, the least item is the manufacturer's empty weight MEW. On top of that, this is what is by the manufacturer. Then we have operating items which are seats, galleys, pallets, containers. Crew and baggage also comes, and items for operation comes there. With this you have the operating empty weight, which is basically the minimum, the manufacturer's equipment weight, empty weight plus the operating equipment. Then you have maximum zero fuel weight, you add the maximum payload to the OEW, you get maximum zero fuel weight, and here there is no mission fuel. Then you have maximum design takeoff weight and maximum landing weight, depending on the loads which come on the landing gear. Right. Now, there are two payload decks in a typical aircraft. There is the upper deck and the lower deck. Now, I am not talking about an aircraft like Airbus A380, which will have three decks actually. There will be upper passenger deck, middle passenger deck and a lower deck for payload. In a typical aircraft, you have a passenger deck and a cargo deck. So, upper deck and lower deck. In the upper deck, you carry passengers and generally in airline service, there is a norm that each passenger is 84 kg, each child is 35 kg, and the charter airlines offer a lesser option. Okay. Then you have cabin baggage. Again, it depends. If you are an airline, full service airline, you will allow 15 kg baggage, maybe one bag per person. In some cases more than one bag, it could be chargeable or not chargeable depending on the service that the airline offers to you. In charter airlines, you generally allow lesser amount of cabin baggage. In the lower deck you have cargo and also the checked in baggage which the passengers have brought, right. Plus it will contain pallets or containers depending on whether you have a palletized cargo service or a container cargo service. It will occupy around 90% of the volume. Now, with the trade off between range and payload, as I mentioned, we need to understand the range payload diagram or RPD. So, most airlines would like to travel with maximum payload, but they can only go to some particular distance, because after that they will hit the maximum takeoff weight limit. So, this particular range corresponding to this point where you have maximum payload and maximum range, with that maximum payload is called as a harmonic range. After this, if you want to travel further, you need to have some trade off between fuel and payload. So, what you do is you are going to reduce the payload and you are going to increase the fuel. That allows you to go to a longer distance, okay. But you will keep on doing it till you hit the maximum takeoff weight limit. So, all points along this line they are going to be corresponding to the maximum takeoff weight line, where there is a trade off between payload and fuel. But then when you come to this point C, you have hit now the maximum fuel tank limit. After this you cannot add any more fuel because now your fuel tank is full. But if you still want to travel further without compromising on the fuel, you have to reduce the payload, then you can travel little bit more distance, and ultimately you come to a point where you have the maximum distance you can travel with no payload, zero payload, fuel maximum, okay. So, this is the range payload diagram. So, this is the basic diagram where the point O corresponds to 0 range, just an aircraft with operating empty weight and the maximum payload. So, it is maximum 0 fuel weight. Now, when you add fuel, you get range, you keep on adding more and more fuel till you reach point A where you hit the maximum takeoff weight limit. Now, you cannot travel any further with full payload. So, you have to start trade off as I mentioned till you reach a point B where now you hit the limit of maximum fuel tank. And after that you can only travel further by reducing the fuel till you hit the ferry range point where there is 0 payload, full fuel, and you are having the maximum distance travelled. So, this is the maximum payload and this is the total fuel line. So, as you can see from this point to this point, you keep on adding more and more fuel till you hit the maximum design takeoff weight line. After this you cannot add more, and once you are going beyond this point, then if you want to travel more distance, you also need to reduce the design takeoff weight or the takeoff weight by reducing the payload further. Now, there are the limitations. So, this is by the fuel tank capacity, okay. Now, what is the effect of change? Suppose I do some changes and I reduce, if I reduce the payload, right. Similarly, if I have a higher design takeoff weight, then I can travel more distance with the same amount of fuel, and this area that you see in the range, this will be the higher payload and range. This is the effect of higher design takeoff weight. Now, if I want to compare two aircraft, aircraft A, aircraft B, this is how I can do. So, this is the RPD of aircraft A, this is the RPD of aircraft B. So, we notice if you superimpose them, we notice that aircraft A is superior in this area because it can travel more distance with full payload. Its full payload is lower than aircraft B, but it can travel larger distance with that payload. Aircraft B is advantageous over this area because it can carry larger payload to these ranges. So, now depending on where your market segment is, you can decide whether aircraft A is suitable for you or market B is suitable for you. So, part 1 ends here and now we can continue with part 2.